Homeschool, a novel by Casey Giltner. Chapter 14. An Education. Daylight flooded Mira's bedroom. She was still awake. She hadn't slept a wink. Finally, when the pain of keeping her eyes open outweighed the fear of closing them, her eyelids fluttered blissfully shut. No more than 30 seconds passed before her door flew open and Vivian entered without knocking. "Rise and shine!" Vivian pulled open the blinds, unleashing a tsunami of sun that penetrated deep into Mira's cerebral cortex. If she had the energy, she would have groaned. Her head was pounding in a new, altogether awful way. "Get yourself cleaned up. We have so much to do," Vivian chirped cheerfully. The bathroom was pale yellow tile against aging white paint. It reminded Mira of a movie she'd seen once about a girl in an insane asylum. What a reassuring thought. Mira turned on the tap. There was an ominous, empty clank, but eventually water did come rushing through the rusted bathtub faucet. She waited a moment for it to turn clear. She went through the motions of undressing. As she went to step in, she realized there was no shower head. She plugged the drain and sat glumly as the tub filled, watching the water level slowly rise around her. The water had barely reached her midriff when the door burst open. Again, it was Vivian. Mira jumped belatedly and covered herself. "Can't you knock?" she muttered. Vivian didn't appear to hear her. "Hurry up! No dilly-dallying. We're meeting the principal at St. Raphael's." "I have to go to school? Today? You've missed enough classes already, what with everything. It'll be good for you." She set a white towel on the toilet seat, gathered up Mira's dirty clothes, and carried them out. "What am I supposed to wear?" Mira called after her. Upon returning to her room, Mira, towel-laden, threw open the wardrobe. Her eyes instantly began to water. It was overwhelmingly musty inside. She flicked through the hanging items. They were old, a veritable vintage haul, most of them extremely chaste and unflattering. On the end was an old Catholic school uniform that must have once been her aunt's. It was black, with white trim, an ankle-length skirt, the collar high and tight. Of all the things in here, it was somehow the least offensive to her sensibilities. She grabbed it with a scowl and began shaking off the dust, airing out the stench of yesterday's chastity. Mira had never gone to public school, but St. Raphael's was on the opposite end of the private school spectrum from experiences, which was only a step or two away from being an intentional community. For some reason, she had expected the school to be like one of those British boarding schools, a non-magical version of Hogwarts, and once the idea had incepted her brain, she couldn't get rid of it. But Hogwarts, St. Raphael's, was not. There were no expansive country grounds, no irascible yet lovable professors in tweed or even wool. There was no warmth, and there was certainly no magic. It was a flat, airless box slapped next to a church and surrounded by pavement, rigid and unyielding like the will of their god. Having arrived 15 minutes early, Mira and Vivian were made to sit and wait for their appointment time and then another 15 minutes after that. Mira shifted uncomfortably, adjusting the skirt, which was too loose on her waist and yet somehow too tight on her thighs. "You were in my dream again last night," Vivian interjected. Mira looked at her, puzzled. "You were leading an expedition through the wilderness, I think. It can be hard to remember. I have the most vivid dreams. Your mother used to joke that they were visions from God." She smiled nostalgically. Mira smirked, appreciative of the new window to her mother as a child, as a sister, as something other than a parent. Just then the door swung open. The principal ambled out. His stomach spilled liberally over his belt, a massive crucifix nestled into his chest. There were copious sweat stains on his short-sleeve white button-up. "Oh, sorry to keep you waiting, Viv." "Principal Reeves." Vivian stood promptly to attention. They shook hands. "You must be Mira." She stood to meet him. His mammoth hand closed completely around Mira's, and, as if that wasn't enough, he brought the second hand in for support. She felt her bones being crushed and tried not to wince. His eyes gave her the once-over, lingering obviously and uncomfortably. Mira shied away from his prying gaze, suddenly thankful for the chaste clothing. "Look, I'll cut to the chase. I would love to have you here, sweetheart, but I'm afraid it's not possible." "I don't understand," Vivian began. Principal Reeves waved a hand. "I can't let her start in the middle of the semester. It isn't fair to the rest of the students." "She's a straight A student." "Such as it is, her class is full. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." The school bell rang. "Let's talk again after the semester, and we'll try and make room for her," Principal Reeves said dismissively and walked back inside his office, closing the door with a sense of finality. Vivian grabbed Mira's hand and set a brisk pace up the hall, already pulling a cigarette out. "That man," she muttered. She was flustered. For once, something hadn't gone her way, and she was having trouble processing it. Students had begun to flood the hallway. Mira wrenched her hand free from Vivian's. She stopped and looked back. The students stared at her as she lingered. But Vivian ushered Mira through the door, and the moment ended. Mira was quietly thankful she wouldn't have to spend the day in school, especially not this one. She felt a natural reprieve from the unknown horrors that could have befallen her here. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder, where am I going to go to school?
"I'll take care of it," Vivian assured her. "Don't you worry about a thing."
Chapter 15. A Thief in the Night. Vivian led Mira into the chapel. Mira shot an uneasy glance at the industrial rug hiding the trapdoor. The previous night had not faded from her memory. If anything, it had crystallized. It was something she was not likely to forget any time soon. Though less ominous in the light of day, the chapel was still a decaying spiritual haunt, one rife for future nightmares. If anything, the more she saw of it, the more certain she was it was hiding something. Daylight did little to dispel the notion that something sinister lurked beneath. She knew enough to know she wanted nothing to do with it. "The diocese stopped using it years ago, but I was recently informed we're going to start holding services again." Vivian smiled and handed Mira a broom. Mira frowned. "What's this for?" "Until we figure out your school situation, I thought we'd put your youthful energy to good use and brighten the place up a bit." "Isn't that like child labor?" Mira asked, never before sounding more like a typical teenager. "Don't be a brat, Mira," Vivian sniped. "Chores are not child labor. You can think of it as community service if you insist. You'll be doing a great service to the church." Mira looked around the chapel. It was in a disastrous state. This was going to take a long fucking time. Her aunt turned tail and strode for the door. Wait, where are you going?" Mira asked, perhaps a bit too desperate, the trapdoor keen in her peripheral vision. Her aunt looked at her, surprised. "Well, I'm not going to sit here and watch you all day. I have important things to do." "What if something happens?" "What could possibly happen? You're in a house of God." She swept from the chapel, leaving an exasperated Mira behind. After a brief survey of the many jobs needing her attention, Mira chose the one furthest from the hidden trapdoor. A series of biblical paintings lined the back of the chapel. The paint had grown faint, yielding over the years to an onslaught of dirt and dust, eventually metastasizing into a fine layer of grime. Mira climbed, perching herself atop of a ladder with a bucket of water. She delicately dabbed away at the dirt. It was awkward work, even for someone young and reasonably athletic like her. The job required strange positions, putting her most unique muscles to the test. It was made even more difficult by her stubborn desire to have the trapdoor within sight at all times. The last thing she wanted was to leave her back exposed to whatever unknown terror lay beneath. After nearly an hour on the same painting, she had barely made a dent. In fact, the clean parts somehow looked worse. In this momentary pause, she became aware of the feeling of being watched. Someone hovering behind her. She heard a slight rustle of fabric and caught a subtle change in the shadows cast against the painting-lined wall. She whipped around, finding none other than Deacon Sandy, posed piously at the chapel's entrance. "Hello, Mira." She didn't respond. Her distrusting eyes were doing plenty of talking. "I apologize if I startled you. You were so focused. I felt it best to simply watch and admire." His mouth curled into a smirk. It was all Mira could do to not dry heave. He set her stomach on edge. Undeterred, the deacon continued. "We didn't have much of a chance to speak at dinner the other night. I thought I should rectify that situation." Mira thought otherwise. She was perfectly content if she never spoke to this man again in her life. He paused, awaiting a response, perhaps expecting her to climb down. "I have a lot of work to do," she explained, hoping he would take the hint. "Yes, I see that," he agreed, but made no move to leave. She hesitated, but ultimately descended to meet him on his level. "I've wanted to meet you for a long time now," Pity it had to happen under such circumstances. Vivian has only had the most splendid things to say. I feel as though we know each other already." Mira did not feel likewise. Her aunt hadn't mentioned anyone at all, from her congregation or otherwise. This man, like the rest, was a complete mystery. But unlike the rest, he stank of subterfuge and ulterior motives. She felt compelled to speak, to say something, to give voice to these concerns, to show him she wouldn't be a pushover. "So you're a priest?" "A deacon." "What's that?" "It's like a priest. It gives me slightly less power, but just between us, much greater responsibilities." Mira wasn't buying it. Now it was the deacon's turn to feel compelled to speak further. "I came late to the faith. I had a great many transgressions in my youth, though I am attempting to make up for them now. God was always speaking to me. I just wasn't ready to listen." He appraised the painting Mira had been cleaning to little effect. It depicted a crowd of people staring up in awe at a flame sitting high amongst the clouds. "Do you know what's happening in the painting?" "Not really," she admitted. Not that she cared in the slightest. "The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up." He stepped closer to Mira as he spoke. She eyed him warily as the space between them grew scarce. "What does that mean?" "Oh, a great many things," he murmured coyly, looking at Mira with great intensity. "Your aunt will explain everything to you. She's very important to all of us, you know. She can be a real help to you, as can I." Mira held her breath as the deacon reached out a hand to pat her on the shoulder, to comfort her. She never found out. Before she could, the chapel doors burst open. Vivian swept inside, per usual, clutching her red notebook. Mira exhaled, thankful for the rescue. When Mira looked back at the deacon again, his hand had returned to his side. "Deacon?" Vivian said, betraying her surprise. "Vivian?" The deacon smirked, practically blushing. "I was just saying hello to this little miracle of a niece of yours." "Well, isn't that nice of you?" Vivian uttered with a barely concealed annoyance. "I'll be on my way. I just wanted to pass along my sympathies and to let Mira know that she has people here who she can depend on." He gazed at Mira most intently and added, "We know you'll do great things." Mira smiled uncomfortably. The deacon departed, calling out dramatically as he strode through the chapel doors, "Behold, he is coming with clouds, and every eye will see him." Mira watched Vivian watch the deacon leave. She was nervous, even more nervous than Mira had been mere minutes earlier. Whatever it was about, the deacon seemed beyond Vivian's otherwise tight control. A wild card. And if there was one thing Mira had learned about Vivian in the last week, it was that she did not like the unexpected. Chapter 16. Homeschool. "What is this? What does it look like?" It was a room in the house Mira hadn't been in before. The door had remained closed, locked, and altogether ignored in the 3 days she'd lived there. Mira had assumed it was an unused office or storage filled with junk, odds and ends, or perhaps even had fallen into disrepair given the age of the place. But no, it wasn't filled with overflow. It was filled with very specific items. A classroom, cobbled together with household items, an old blackboard, a bookshelf, an ancient clock, a pointer stick, an antique drawing desk for a teacher, and a single small table serving as a student's desk, paired oddly with an ornate, velvet-winged back chair. "I should have thought of it sooner," Vivian gushed. "I mean, it makes perfect sense when you think about it." "What makes perfect sense?" "I have 12 years of teaching experience, and you need a teacher." Vivian settled in behind her desk with an armload of books, supplies, and, as usual, her red notebook. She had mentioned her prior career in passing on their road trip. Mira had no memory of what her aunt may or may not have done for work over the decades. Now that she was thinking of it, she wondered exactly how Vivian was paying the bills and keeping food on the table. Was there money? Where was it coming from? Her aunt had no traditional employment, as far as Mira could tell. "Homeschool?" Mira spat, the words vinegar in her mouth. "Oh, don't say it like that. But that's what it is. It's homeschool." Technically, I suppose. Nobody likes the homeschool kid. Since when are you concerned with the opinion of others? Mira started a retort but stopped herself. Honey, you need a teacher who knows what you've been through and can tailor lessons to your particular needs. Mira's anger flared. My needs? You suffered a great trauma. We both did. Vivian came around the desk, took Mira tightly by the shoulders, open and sincere, cutting right through Mira's performative rage. But you are at a pivotal moment in your life. These are the most formative days in your young life. We can't afford for you to fall any further behind. We'll get through the fall together, and if all goes well, you can start at St. Raphael's next semester. She was trying to console her. Mira could see that. She knew her aunt only wanted what was best for her. But this homeschool gambit was making it so hard to be thankful. Why didn't she get that? Pick any seat you want. Mira groaned at the corny joke. There was only one seat, the wingback chair, which was far too low to the floor for her desk. Maybe her aunt was just a little oblivious, she realized, out of touch with the times. She didn't have a kid of her own, after all, and her only acquaintances were from older generations. Mira dropped in the wingback chair, slinking far lower than intended. Vivian moved to the blackboard and began scratching out a class schedule with chalk. I had the principal send over the ninth grade curriculum from St. Raphael's. The least he could do, really. We'll start from there and make it our own. The day was neatly portioned into hour-long blocks. Nothing about this was slapdash. It seemed Vivian had given serious thought to this endeavor. How she had pieced all this together in 24 hours was a mystery. 6 a.m. Wake up. 7 a.m. Breakfast. 8 a.m. Math. 9 a.m. Science. 10 a.m. History. 11 a.m. English. Noon. Lunch. 1 p.m. Religious studies. 2 p.m. Art. 3 p.m. Language. 4 p.m. Chores. 5 p.m. Quiet study. 6 p.m. Dinner. 7 p.m. Quiet study. 8 p.m. Bed. Bed? At 8? Early to bed, early to rise. I don't have a bedtime. I never have. Structuring your day is vitally important, especially for when we are feeling down and out. You will be amazed what you can accomplish with the right routine. You haven't given me any free time. Oh, Vivian said, surprised but unconcerned. I'm sure we'll find some time in there to do whatever it is you'd like to do. Mira started to respond, but caught herself and bit her tongue. She didn't want to object to everything, but there were just so many things wrong with this, so many injustices that had to be pointed out. Why religious studies? A spiritual element is part of any well-rounded education. My mom and I are atheist, Vivian grimaced. Atheist? She seemed to choke on the word. My sister never did take her faith seriously. She stared at the floor with a haunted nostalgia before regaining her composure. All the more reason to study it now. I already learned about religions in social studies. Trust me, Mira, there's no social studies class in the world that can teach you what I can. Chapter 17. Rules. Mira was exhausted. One day of homeschool had felt like a week at her old school experiences. Each minute passed like an hour, each hour an eternity. The direct, unobstructed focus of her aunt was potent and unyielding. There was no one else to hide behind, no one else to deflect attention, no one else to answer a question, no one else to talk to or joke with, no one else to do anything. Every sigh was clocked, every squirm was tracked, every yawn felt like a personal attack she leveled against her aunt. One vain attempt to rest her head in her arms had led to an impromptu staring match, a test of wills that Mira had promptly retreated from. It's not that Mira wanted to slack off or be seen as rude, but the sheer weight of the class load, after so long a layoff, made paying proper attention impossible. Vivian was smart, well-educated, and her many years of teaching experience showed. She bounced between straight lecture and the Socratic method, a mixture of expectation and probing, somewhat old-fashioned, but always quick to get to the point, just as she was in life. Mira dropped an armful of textbooks onto her bed. She stared wistfully out her lone window. The outdoors called to her. Notably, there was no room in her aunt's schedule for gym or sports or anything close to resembling exercise. There were no outdoor activities and no room for even a brief sojourn into nature, unlike experiences where they held classes outside if the days were nice enough. The more Mira dwelled on that point, the angrier it made her. She needed sun. She needed warmth. She needed fresh air. She checked the clock. It was 5:15 p.m., which the schedule had delineated as quiet study. Screw the schedule, she thought. She bounded out of her room, down the stairs, and was halfway out the front door when her aunt's voice halted her in her tracks. "Where are you going?" Vivian was sitting in the living room next to a tidy little fire, writing up a storm in her red leather-bound notebook. I saw a park down the street." Vivian finished jotting down her thought, closed her notebook, and calmly looked up. "Have you finished your homework?" "Most of it," Mira demurred. "Most of it?" Mira frowned, knowing intuitively what was coming next. "I'm not trying to be difficult, Mira, but extracurricular activities are for when your homework is finished. All of your homework." "That doesn't make sense," said the little voice in her head. A waft of anger bubbled up inside her. Before she could process the thought, it was already tumbling out of her mouth. "Why?" Vivian blinked. She didn't immediately respond, as though her brain was having an aneurysm. Clearly, she was not accustomed to being questioned. "Because those are the rules." "But that rule doesn't make sense. Homework comes first. When am I supposed to go outside? I haven't left the house all week. I need sunlight, fresh air, exercise. You're a child, Mira. You need structure, routine, guidelines. This is one of them. Your mother and I had the same rule growing up, and we turned out just fine." Vivian emphasized her point with arched eyebrows and a nod that implied obviousness. "Dinner is at 6. Have your homework completed before then." "But you gave me too much homework. I'll never have time to go outside." "I trust you'll manage." Vivian returned to her red notebook, thusly ending the conversation. Later, over a dinner of meatloaf, boiled potatoes, and green beans, only one of which Mira ended up eating, she couldn't help but reflect on the last week. As Vivian smoked her cigarette and read back the day's notes from her red notebook, Mira pushed her food around unhappily. Nothing was as she had expected. Living with her aunt had gone from promising to tolerable to unbearable in only a few days' time. Sleeplessness kept claiming her nights. She had found initial elation in the stillness of the house, away from the eyes of others, but come nighttime, the stillness was a trap, the void filled by the abstract, and she had none of her usual distractions to use as shields against the visceral terrors of the night. She had asked her aunt repeatedly when her belongings would finally arrive, but each time she received a variation of the same answer. "They really should have been here by now. I'll call the moving company tomorrow and check for you." Night came slowly, and then all at once. It snuck up on her more as her exhaustion mounted, each sleepless night leading to another school-filled, task-laden day. Even Saturday had followed this pattern, as Vivian had insisted they make up for lost time. When her eyes did finally slip shut, she was rudely met with the flash of headlights on a dark, foggy road. She alternated perspectives. One night she was the lamb, rudely run down in cold blood. The next night she was the driver, obliterating the oncoming sheep. Each time she approached the wounded lamb, just as she had in life, she found it changed, with 7 heads and many great horns that grew larger with every passing night. Massacred, innards out, wheezing in pain, crying, bleeding for mercy, it would wheeze and cry until Mira could take no more, at which point she would wake up, drenched in sweat, the lamb's cry still echoing in her ears. Tomorrow was Sunday at least. She wouldn't have class. She'd be able to get outside. She'd be able to rest. Hopefully, she'd be able to sleep. Chapter 18. Church of the Holy Tetrad. Vivian was insistent. Attending church was not up for debate. While adamant in reiterating her atheism, Mira had nonetheless relented. She acceded to her aunt's request to accompany her to Sunday Mass. At least it would get her out of the house, she thought. How bad could it be? It was about community, her aunt had explained, not actually about religion, per se. And all of Vivian's friends would be expecting Mira to attend. She didn't want to let them down, did she? In the end, Mira was too tired to fight. They left the house promptly at 7:30 a.m. in their Sunday best, which, for Mira, meant a floor-length lavender wool dress with frilled sleeves that stretched beyond her wrist all the way to the knuckle on her thumbs. The garment defied any effort to push the sleeves up. Somehow, this was not even the most repressive of the old outfits in her wardrobe. She started sweating immediately, but there was no time to try on anything else. "Hurry up, we can't be late," Vivian called from downstairs. When Mira arrived downstairs, she found she was far more ready to depart than her aunt. Vivian herself was still dressing and curling her hair simultaneously. She buttoned up her blouse with one hand, arcing her head and taking the wand to the dangling clumps of hair with the other. "You look nice," Vivian said, finishing up the last topmost button just south of her neck and grabbing her toothbrush. Mira slunk out the front door and waited. Across the street were two neighbors. A middle-aged couple was loitering on their front lawn, by the looks of it, discussing the flower beds and the best path forward for the landscaping. They sensed Mira and looked over. The woman covered her mouth as though scandalized and whispered something in the man's ear. He nodded his head and glared at Mira disapprovingly. Mira couldn't suppose why. Her dress couldn't be that bad. Thankfully, before it could grow any more awkward, Vivian whisked outside, clasping her purse. She immediately clocked the gawking neighbors and met their disdainful stare with an icy glare of her own. The couple promptly turned their backs and resumed their discussion. Mira followed Vivian into the car, but she was unnerved by the couple's prying gaze. They didn't know her, so why had they been so rude? Didn't they have any manners? Clearly there was something between the couple and Vivian, some history that Mira didn't know about. She watched them with uncertainty out the rearview mirror until they faded from sight. They drove out of New Hope into the countryside of central Wisconsin. It was bland, unspectacular land. Dirt and mud and cow pastures and knee-high corn and a shocking lack of trees. To Mira's surprise, they eventually turned into the driveway of one such farm. It was on the nicer end of Wisconsin farms. Manicured cornfields surrounded the property. A well-kept barn and silo sat alongside a freshly painted white farmhouse. Cats roamed freely. Vivian parked the car in a grass field where a number of other cars had formed a makeshift parking lot. "I thought you were taking me to church," Mira said. "This is a church," Vivian replied with a small smile. "For now, until the chapel is ready." A steady stream of people swarmed toward the barn, a bright, eye-popping red monstrosity. Mira and Vivian joined the tail end of the train. The inside housed neither equipment nor animals, but had in fact been renovated to resemble a church. There were pews, an altar, and an electric organ. Drapery, flowers, and religious decorations. A crowd was gathering, mingling, and greeting one another jubilantly. There was little of the reserved nature Mira had expected, the pious quiet with which she had associated Catholics. In fact, now that she was looking closer, there was nothing remotely Catholic about this gathering at all. It had remnants and influences, but this was something different, and perhaps altogether new. A massive version of the diamond crucifix was strung up in the rafters just below a banner emblazoned with, "The Church of the Holy Tetrad." "I thought you were Catholic," Mira whispered. "I was, but I believe in so much more now," Vivian responded and led Mira directly down the center aisle, not stopping to interact with anyone. A hush came over the crowd. Every eye shot in their direction and stuck, following them until they took seats in the very first row. Mira receded inward, but Vivian beamed with pride and satisfaction, soaking in the admiration. Why were they looking at her? Just how important was her aunt here? It seemed, based on this reaction, that she had buried the lead. The rest of the congregation followed their initiative and quickly found seats of their own. The electronic organ struck a tone and began to moan. Vivian stood on the musical cue. A wave of congregants rose behind her. Mira, too, belatedly, stood, trying to tune out the eyes penetrating into her back. The organ leaned into a pause before launching into Joy to the World. Heads angled back down the center aisle where Deacon Sandy emerged, dressed in an elegant ceremonial red satin robe. There were no altar boys or any of the unnecessary Catholic processional elements, just the deacon in all his splendor. The congregation sang along without tune. Vivian held the songbook for Mira. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. In heaven nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Mira mumbled along with some garbled nonsense while she snuck a peek around at the other churchgoers. She spotted the Rutherfords, who themselves were stealing a glance at Mira. They looked down quickly upon being caught. She found Mrs. Mastrani in the back corner. She, too, was looking at Mira. But unlike the Rutherfords, she didn't turn away. On the contrary, she seemed to revel in Mira's gaze. Mira broke the spell and looked away. The music ended.
Deacon Sandy stood on a riser at the front of the barn and lifted his hands to the congregation.
The Lord God be with us, and may his prophecy be fulfilled. We will share in the fruits of his works, the entire congregation responded energetically. The deacon beamed out at them. As we gather today, on this beautiful, resplendent Sabbath, we have the good fortune of welcoming a new addition to our humble congregation. Mira! Mira's face burned red. Oh no. And it turned downright crimson when Deacon Sandy stepped down from the riser with great ceremony and approached Mira. I hope each and every one of you have the opportunity to welcome Mira to our family. I myself have already had the honor. I can tell you firsthand, she is truly exceptional.
He walked the whole way with his arms held pompously aloft, stopping directly in front of her.
Mira, we hope you'll look at us like a family. Your family. We are all here for you, and we know you'll do great things. Now, let us pray. He reached out and placed his hands penitently on either side of her head. She jerked away, but Vivian placed a steadying hand on her back. The rest of the congregation began to crowd toward her, all of them reaching out a hand to either touch Mira or touch the closest person to her. An unending web, a chain connecting the entire congregation. They all closed their eyes and began to recite. Bless us, Lord God, softly as a whisper you send salvation to this fallen world. Into the quiet of the night, the light of the world flickers into human life, a light that will enlighten humanity, a light that will save the world. They all knew the words to this creed. Their eyes pressed tightly closed, their faces more fanatical, more devoted with each line. Through it all, Mira's eyes remained wide open. She couldn't move. She was trapped, hands all over her body, feeling more violated and uncomfortable with each line. The fulfillment of your prophecy is close at hand. Chapter 19. The Prophecy. Mira ground her elbows into her desk, head hunched forward. It was impossible to concentrate on the worksheet in front of her. Some nonsense about the Reformation. Vivian had taught the lesson in what was supposedly her history period, but it became quickly apparent to Mira that history to her aunt meant history of religion. She was supposed to draw modern parallels. Mira hardly knew what a parallel was, much less anything about current events or trends in religious institutions. She scribbled Scientology on the worksheet, something she knew next to nothing about, but it was the best shot in the dark she was likely to come up with. The previous day's experience in the barn, violating on so many levels, had been all she could think about for 24 hours. As she pored over all that she had witnessed, all that she had felt at the Church of the Holy Tetrad, it wasn't the cloying obnoxiousness of Deacon Sandy or the multitudes of wrinkled old hands clawing at her that disturbed her most. No. Instead, she kept coming back to one simple question over and over and over again until finally she could keep it in no longer. What's the prophecy? Vivian was hunched over at her desk. The red leather-bound notebook lay open in front of her. Her brow scrunched, but she didn't bother to look up. You should be focused on your assignment. Undeterred, Mira stared at her, waiting for an answer, eyes burrowing into the top of her aunt's head. Finally, Vivian could take Mira's burning gaze no more, and relented. She sighed, folded her notebook shut, and looked up at Mira. The prophecy is, she began, choosing her words very carefully, the foundation of our faith, the very heart of our beliefs, and, unfortunately, it's what caused our split from the Catholic Church. But what is it? Mira insisted. We have a lot of lessons to get through before the prophecy could begin to make sense, Vivian demurred. And you're an atheist anyway, right? You'd probably think it was silly. Sillier than a virgin giving birth to the Son of God, Mira interjected before she could stop herself. Vivian clenched her jaw. Her glare could have cut glass. Sorry, Mira apologized quickly. I wouldn't rush to mock us, Vivian warned her, or our prophecy. Those who laugh first are often the last to find the truth. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Mira wondered. Vivian opened her notebook once more, then added dismissively, Finish your work. But the work was never finished. When the schoolwork was granted a brief respite, the manual labor or chores began. The cleaning of the chapel was slow going. A whole day could be spent without making much of a dent. Her hands were being used in ways they'd never been used before. The tasks were wide-ranging and not what anyone would consider relevant to her expertise. From sanding the splintered pews to scraping old paint off the wall, it was all mundane, thankless work. It was made worse because she knew the only people who would benefit from it were those freaking tetrad people. Today, she had finally advanced to putting fresh paint on a single, fully scraped and sanded wall. She slopped it about, making a mess on the floor that would also need attending to, but her only goal each day was to get that day's chore done as quickly as possible and allow herself the possibility of escaping the compound, as she had taken to calling it in her head, for even a single minute. Mira finished the wall in what she considered record time. It was sloppy, but the whole wall was technically painted, as well as most of her hands, wrists, and arms. She rinsed out the brushes, closed up the paint, and raced back over to the house. She found Vivian in the kitchen, busy cutting carrots, already deep into dinner prep. I finished everything. Can I go outside? To the park? Please? Mira asked breathlessly. She knew what the response would be before she asked. This, indeed, was the third time she had finished her chores early enough to even ask. But the song and dance routine was tired, and Mira was ready to preempt the usual responses. Vivian's refusal began just as it had the day before. I know we're just about to eat, Mira interrupted. Please, Aunt Vivian, just for a little bit. I'll be back in time. Just let me go today, and I promise I won't ask again tomorrow. Mira hid her paint-covered hands behind her back, lest there be one more excuse her aunt could use to delay her. Vivian aggressively cut another carrot. She arched her head to look at the clock. We're eating dinner at 6. You really think 20 minutes is enough time to go there and back? I can run a mile in 6 minutes and 25 seconds. Yes, I think I can make it, she stated, matter of fact, careful not to let sarcasm sneak into her voice. Vivian wrinkled up her face. She knew she had no good reason to say no, so what was it going to be this time? What was the excuse to keep Mira here? Why was this so hard? Surely she was going to allow Mira some freedom eventually, right? What was she so afraid of? Go. What? Go, Vivian said louder to Mira's great surprise. But be back on time. There's no room in life for tardiness. Mira didn't give her an opportunity to change her mind. She sprinted for the front door. Thank you, I promise I'll be back. And don't go past the park. The north side isn't as safe as it used to be, Vivian called after her. Mira skipped down the street with no particular destination in mind. She soaked in the sun like a long-lost friend, just happy to be out of the house. God, how she missed it. How amazing it felt after weeks in the shadows. How much she had taken it for granted. How much she had taken everything for granted. Never again, she promised herself. As she passed one neighbor's house, a face appeared suddenly in the window. Even through the glass, she recognized the makeup. It was Mrs. Mastroianni. She regarded Mira suspiciously. The old Italian had a crazed manner at the best of times. The look she was giving Mira now was downright manic. Mira put her head down and hurried past. When she chanced to glance back, she saw that Mrs. Mastroianni had stepped out on her front porch in order to watch her further. It seemed as though the craggly old woman might just follow her right off her stoop. Mira broke into a run. She whisked through a patch of trees, away from the old woman's gaze, creating as much distance as possible as quickly as she could manage it, only slowing when she was certain she hadn't been followed. Eventually, she emerged upon the park. It was typical for a town like New Hope. nestled right into the neighborhood like an old town square, a wooden playground castle rising at the center, its de facto city hall. There was a tennis court, a baseball field, a modest but functional concrete skate park paradise, plenty of grass fields, and vigorous thickets of trees and bushes. The adults were always concerned about the seedier aspects, even though they'd all bought their houses specifically for the proximity to a park. Nothing about it was new. The neglect shown to its upkeep by the city manifested itself twice over. The playground was a splinter waiting to happen. The baseball diamond was more weeds than sand. The tennis court was cracked and uneven. It was always dirty. Trash cans were rarely emptied. An empty liquor bottle was never far away. The shelter and bathrooms had been padlocked shut rather than deal with keeping them clean. Kids of all ages naturally swarmed to it anyway. Mira loved it on sight. Her bar was low at the moment, but she still found infinite promise in this patchwork oasis. The skate park in particular called to her, a paradise that, though modest, was certainly functional enough to scratch her extreme sports itch. But it was far too populated to even consider approaching at present. In her own mind, Mira was simply not cool enough to hang out at a place like that. The kids, perhaps lacking in some departments, were not short on self-confidence. One wrong look, one glare of, "Who the fuck is that?" and Mira was certain she would crumble. Instead, she settled for the swing set. She was too old to swing meaningfully or even intentionally. Instead, she just sort of drifted back and forth for a minute, melting her body weight into the rubber seat. But soon, she felt the urge and pushed off fully with both feet, back and forth, feeling more unburdened with each pass. The air fluttered through her hair. The warmth of the sun sank comfortably into her face. The motion, the small thrill of a G-force activity after so much stillness, was a godsend. She came skidding to an abrupt stop in the gravel. Over in the skate park, a girl was gliding up and down the half-pipe. It was her, the one she had seen skateboarding down her aunt's street in the dead of that first night. Mira's eyes trailed her as she wove through other skaters, grinding on a rail, up and down the half-pipe, rolling up a ramp, eventually stopping next to a collection of young punk boys. The punks started talking her ear off. It was clear they were impressed by her skating and possibly other features. She was an easy, natural skater, and she seemed just as carefree with her feet on the ground. Mira watched curiously. The girl clearly took no shit from anybody. She was comfortable in her own skin, something not usually the case with anyone at their age. Her body language displayed little interest in the punk boys' posturing. That was until the boys turned and pointed at Mira. Oh shit. They'd seen her watching. Mira jumped off the swing and hightailed it out of the park, never daring to stop or look back. She couldn't bear an awkward interaction with someone her own age, not right now, especially not with that girl. There was something about her. Mira didn't know what it was, but she didn't have the bandwidth to find out. Mira hustled briskly down her street. She was almost back to her aunt's house when she heard it, the whir of skateboard wheels grinding loudly on the pavement from behind her. Then someone shouted at her. Homeschool is brought to you by Wonder Peak Media. Written by Casey Giltner. Homeschool was read by me, Zoe Reed. Produced by Ava Provolo. Edited by Reed Barron. Music by Young Jun Kim. Artwork by Kim Jacobson.